Hello, friends. Welcome back. Last time we discovered one peculiar little feature of Greek, which is that very often the Greek words that you've been taught for, like the Theotokos, or the Greek word for Christ, Christos, or the Greek word for Lord, Kurios, are not always the same as the words as you hear them in Byzantine chants, where, for example, when they're praying to the Theotokos, they'll address her as Theotokat, or when they address Christ in prayers, they'll address him as Christe, not Christos, or they'll address the Lord as Kyrie, not Kurios. Even though when you look those words up in a Greek dictionary or lexicon, you find Theotokos, Christos, Kurios. Why are there two different words? Well, we adumbrated this before. Greek changes the form of a word, depending on whether it's speaking to that person or thing or about that person or thing. As we saw last time, if it's addressing someone, it addresses them as Kyrie, Christe, Theotoke. The form of the word that you find in the dictionary is something that Greek textbooks call the nominative form, the naming form, which is because that's the form that you use in Greek if you just point to something and you say what it's called. So, for example, if a visitor showed up at our church from ancient Greece, you could actually give them a pretty competent tour of the church just by taking them around and pointing out the various things and naming them using the standard Greek translations that you probably learned for a bunch of stuff. You could point to an icon and say, Eikon, this is an icon. You could point to the church building and say, Ecclesia, this is the church. You could point to an icon of the Theotokos and say Theotokos, or an icon of the Lord and say Christos. You could point at a psalm or a gospel and say psalmos or evangelion. You could point to an icon of an angel or a prophet or an apostle or martyr and use the standard Greek word that you might have heard before, angelos, prophetes, apostolos, martus, martyr. You could even point at Deacon David and say diakonos, deacon, or point at Father Ian or Father Michael and say presbyteros, the priest. You could even point at our choir and say choros. That form of Greek words that you know from like reading books and dictionaries, that's the form that you use in Greek when you name something. Similarly, in the gospel, when Jesus says to Peter, hey, Peter, who do you say I am? Peter answers simply, ha Christos, the Christ. This also comes up in the pre-communion prayers in Psalm 24. The psalm is talking about the King of Glory. And then in verse 8, it asks, who is this King of Glory? And then right away, it answers itself, the Lord, strong and mighty. In Greek, the psalm asks itself the question, who is the King of Glory? And then it answers itself with dictionary forms. Kurios, the Lord. Krataios, the strong one. Dunatos, the mighty one. Now, pause here and just be impressed with yourself for a moment by what you've learned. For any Greek word that you've ever heard or picked up from prayer or church or chants before, there will be the form that you use when you point to a thing and say what it is, the naming form. And then there's the vocative form. That's the form that you use when you address the person. You could point to the deacon and say diakonos, or you could address the deacon in Greek and say diakone. And next time, we'll come back and we'll learn a third form of these words that will solve another little mystery, which is, why does Greek not have a word for of? Why is it that Greek expresses the idea of using no separate word at all? The answer is it uses another form of the noun, which we'll meet next time.